The dust settled across the cracked earth of West Texas as Jacob Morrison wiped the sweat from his brow. Surveying the barren land that had been his family's ranch for 3 generations, now barely holding on after 2 years of relentless drought. At 42 years old, Jacob had seen better days. His weathered hands told stories of hard work and harder times, the kind of calluses that come from holding on to something long after others would have let go. The sun was merciless that August afternoon in 1952, beating down on the dry grasslands where his remaining 12 cattle grazed on whatever sparse vegetation they could find, their ribs showing through their hides like piano keys. Jacob's ranch, once spanning over 500 acres of prime grazing land, had been reduced to a struggling operation where every day felt like a battle against nature itself, against debt, against the slow march toward inevitable failure. His wife Martha had passed 3 winters ago, leaving him alone in the old farmhouse with nothing but memories and a mountain of bills that seemed to grow taller with each passing month. The bank had already sent 2 letters, polite at first, then increasingly urgent, reminding him that the mortgage was 4 months overdue and patience was running thin. But Jacob wasn't the type to give up easily. Every morning he rose before dawn, tended to his animals, repaired fences with salvaged wire, and prayed for rain that never seemed to come. His nearest neighbor was 15 miles east, and the small town of Redemption Creek lay 20 miles west, a lonely existence but one he'd grown accustomed to over the years. That particular afternoon, Jacob was mending a section of fence near the southern boundary of his property when he heard something unusual, voices, strained and desperate, coming from beyond the rocky outcrop that marked the edge of his land. He grabbed his rifle, more out of habit than fear, and walked carefully toward the sound, his boots crunching against the dry earth with each step. What he found stopped him in his tracks. 2 women, clearly Apache, were struggling to free their horse from a narrow crevice between 2 large boulders. The animal was panicking, its leg caught at an awkward angle. Both women were tall, powerfully built, with long black hair tied back. Wearing a mix of traditional clothing and practical riding gear, their faces streaked with dust and concern. The horse was thrashing violently, and Jacob could see that if they didn't act quickly, the animal would either break its leg or injure the women who were trying desperately to calm it. Without hesitation, Jacob set down his rifle and approached slowly, his hands raised to show he meant no harm, speaking in a calm, steady voice that seemed to cut through the chaos. "Let me help," he said simply, and though the women exchanged uncertain glances, the urgency of the situation left little room for debate. The older of the 2 women, who introduced herself as Ayana, explained in clear English that they'd been riding through when their horse spooked at a rattlesnake and bolted into the rocks. Her sister Nasha was clearly in pain, her arm bleeding from a gash where the rocks had scraped her during the struggle, but she refused to step away from the trapped animal. Jacob assessed the situation quickly. Years of working with livestock had taught him how to handle panicked animals. He sent Ayana to his truck to grab rope and a blanket while he spoke softly to the horse, his voice a low, soothing rumble. "Easy now, easy. Nobody's going to hurt you. We're going to get you out of there," he murmured, placing a gentle hand on the horse's neck, feeling the rapid pulse beneath the sweat-soaked coat. It took nearly an hour of careful work, using the rope as a pulley system anchored to a sturdy mesquite tree, and the blanket to protect the horse's leg, but finally they managed to ease the animal free from the crevice. The horse stumbled but remained standing. Jacob examined the leg carefully, running his experienced hands along the bones and joints, checking for breaks or serious damage. "He'll be sore for a few days, but nothing's broken." "You were lucky," Jacob said, looking up at the 2 women who were watching him with a mixture of relief and something else, respect perhaps, or simple gratitude. Nasha's arm was still bleeding, and Jacob insisted they come back to his ranch house so he could properly clean and bandage the wound, despite their initial protests. "It's 3 miles to my place. You can rest there, water your horse, and I'll make sure that Cut doesn't get infected out here. Infection can kill you faster than a bullet," he said matter-of-factly. The sisters exchanged a long look, some unspoken communication passing between them, before Ayanna nodded slowly and accepted his offer. Back at the ranch house, Jacob worked efficiently, cleaning Nasha's wound with whiskey and wrapping it with clean bandages torn from one of his few remaining good shirts. His touch was gentle but sure. He offered them water from his well, cold and clean, and what little food he had, some jerky, bread, and canned peaches, apologizing for the meager spread with a self-deprecating smile. "Times have been tough, but I've still got enough to share with folks who need it," he said, and there was no self-pity in his voice, just simple honesty. Ayanna studied him carefully as they ate, noting the worn furniture, the empty spaces on the walls where things had clearly been sold, the general air of a man holding on to something by sheer willpower alone. "Why did you help us? Many white men in these parts would have kept riding or worse," she asked directly, her dark eyes searching his face for deception. Jacob shrugged, taking a sip of water from his chipped mug before answering. "My Martha used to say that the measure of a man isn't what he has, but what he does when he has nothing. I figure she was right about that. You can't judge a whole people by the actions of some. Any more than I'd want to be judged by the worst examples of mine. Seemed to me you needed help, and I had 2 hands and some rope. Simple as that," he continued. Nasha spoke for the first time, her voice softer than her sister's but carrying equal weight. "Our people have long memories, both of kindness and of cruelty. What you did today will not be forgotten." As the sun began to set, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, the sisters prepared to leave, their horse now rested and calm, ready for the journey ahead. Ayanna clasped Jacob's hand in both of hers, a gesture of deep respect. "You have shown us great kindness, Jacob Morrison. We will remember this." Jacob waved off their thanks with typical modesty. "Just glad I could help. You 2 ride safe now. And keep that wound clean," he called after them as they rode away into the gathering dusk. That night, Jacob sat on his porch as he did every evening, looking out at his struggling ranch and wondering how much longer he could keep fighting the losing battle against drought and debt. He thought about the 2 Apache women, about their quiet dignity and strength, about how strange and wonderful it was that in his darkest hour he'd been given the chance to help someone else. The next morning arrived with the same relentless heat. Jacob was up before dawn as usual, tending to his animals and trying to calculate if he could stretch his feed supply another week. He was pouring grain into a trough when he heard the sound of horses. Many horses, approaching from the south. His heart skipped a beat as he grabbed his rifle and walked cautiously toward the front of his property. What he saw made him stop in his tracks. A group of about 20 Apache riders was approaching, led by an older man with long gray hair and a bearing that spoke of authority and command. Beside him rode Ayanna and Nasha, and Jacob's confusion deepened as the entire group came to a halt about 50 yards from his fence line, sitting perfectly still on their horses. The older man dismounted with surprising grace for his age and walked forward, his weathered face impassive. Jacob lowered his rifle but kept it in his hands, uncertain of what was happening. "I am Chief Nahiasi of the Mescalero Apache. These are my daughters whom you aided yesterday," the chief said in perfect English, his voice carrying the weight of years and wisdom. Jacob's jaw nearly dropped. He'd helped the chief's daughters without knowing who they were, and now the chief himself stood on his property with 20 warriors behind him. "I didn't know. I just helped because it was the right thing to do," Jacob stammered, feeling suddenly foolish with his inadequate words. Chief Nahiasi studied him for a long moment, his dark eyes seeming to look straight through to Jacob's soul. "My daughters told me of your kindness, of how you helped strangers without hesitation, of how you shared what little you had though you yourself are struggling. They also told me of the condition of your land, of the drought that has broken your prosperity, of the emptiness in your home that speaks of recent loss," the chief continued. Jacob felt his throat tighten. He wasn't used to being the subject of such scrutiny, wasn't used to anyone caring about his struggles. "I'm managing," he said quietly, though they both knew it was only partially true. The chief nodded slowly, then made a gesture, and several of the riders behind him dismounted and began unloading supplies from pack horses, bags of grain, dried meat, tools, blankets, and other goods. "What is this?" Jacob asked, confusion evident in his voice. "Among my people, there is a sacred law when someone saves a life, especially the life of one of our leaders' children, a debt is created that must be honored," Chief Nahiyasi explained. "But I didn't save their lives, I just helped with a horse," Jacob protested. Ayana stepped forward, speaking clearly so all could hear. "The horse was panicking. I was trying to free it when I felt the ground shifting. There were more rocks above, unstable. If you hadn't arrived when you did and calmed the horse so quickly, the rock slide would have been triggered. We both would have been buried." Jacob hadn't even noticed the unstable rocks above. He'd been so focused on helping the horse and treating Nash's injury. Chief Nahiyasi continued, "I have made a decision. My people will help you restore your ranch. We will bring water. We will help repair your land. And we will ensure that you do not lose your home. I can't accept that. It's too much. I don't have any way to repay you," Jacob said, his pride warring with his desperate need. "It is not a gift that requires repayment. It is the honoring of a debt, and among my people, such debts are sacred obligations," the chief said firmly. "Furthermore, you treated my daughters not as savages, not as problems, but as human beings in need of help. In these times, such treatment from a white man is rarer than rain in the desert," he added. Over the next several weeks, Jacob's life transformed in ways he could never have imagined. Apache workers arrived each day, helping to dig new irrigation channels, repair fences, and restore the land. They brought techniques passed down through generations, ways of water conservation that white ranchers had never learned, methods of encouraging native grasses to return even in drought conditions. Chief Nahiyasi himself visited often, and he and Jacob spent long evenings talking, sharing stories of loss, of survival, of the complicated history between their peoples. "You know, the bank is still going to come for the mortgage," Jacob said one evening, the guilt of accepting so much help weighing on him. The chief smiled, a rare expression that transformed his stern features. "The bank has been paid, an anonymous benefactor. They will not trouble you again." Jacob stared at him in shock. "You can't. That's thousands of dollars. My people have resources that many do not see. We have learned to prosper quietly, without drawing attention," the chief explained. "Consider it an investment in a future where men like you, who see humanity before race, can thrive and set an example for others," he continued. News of what was happening spread through the region. Some neighboring ranchers were curious, others suspicious, but none could deny the transformation taking place on Jacob Morrison's land. Within 3 months, the ranch was more productive than it had been in 5 years. The Apache techniques had worked miracles, even in the ongoing drought. Jacob hired 2 Apache workers permanently, paying them fair wages, and his ranch became known as a place where all people were treated with dignity and respect. The story spread even further when a reporter from the regional newspaper came to investigate the Miracle Ranch, and Jacob told the truth, every bit of it, giving credit where credit was due. "I was drowning, and instead of watching me go under, Chief Nahiyasi and his people threw me a rope, and then they taught me how to swim," Jacob told the reporter simply. The article that followed sparked something unexpected. Other ranchers began reaching out to the Apache community, seeking to learn their water conservation methods. Prejudices began to crack, slowly but surely. Chief Nahiyasi visited Jacob one final time before returning to his own lands. The two men stood on the porch, looking out over the restored ranch, the sun setting behind them. "You gave us more than help with the horse, Jacob Morrison. You gave my daughters dignity in a moment when they were vulnerable. That is a gift beyond measure," the chief said. Jacob shook his head slowly. "I think you've given me far more than I gave you. You've given me a future, hope, and a lesson I'll never forget." "The lesson is simple," the chief replied. "Kindness is never wasted. Compassion creates ripples that spread farther than we can ever know. You showed humanity to two strangers, and that single act changed the course of many lives. In a world that often divides us by the color of our skin, by our traditions, by our histories, you chose to see two people who needed help. That is the choice that changes everything," he continued. As the chief rode away for the last time, Jacob stood watching until the dust settled on the horizon, his heart full of gratitude and wonder at how quickly life could change. The ranch prospered. Jacob eventually remarried a school teacher from town who shared his values of equality and kindness. Together they built a life that honored the lesson he'd learned that day in the desert. Years later, when people asked Jacob about his success, about how he'd turned his failing ranch into one of the most prosperous in the region, he always told the same story, never embellishing, never exaggerating. "I learned that the greatest investment you can make is in human dignity. Treat people as people, help when you can, and trust that goodness creates more goodness," he would say. And never underestimate the power of a single act of kindness. You never know when helping a stranger might change your life forever, he would conclude with a gentle smile. The bond between Jacob Morrison and Chief Nahiyasi's family lasted for the rest of their lives, a bridge built on mutual respect, spanning the divide that had separated their peoples for so long. And it all began with one simple choice to help two women and their horse because it was the right thing to do. No other reason needed, no reward expected, just one human being helping another in their time of need. In the end, that's what changed everything. Not grand gestures or political movements, but one man who chose compassion over indifference, who saw humanity before seeing difference, who proved that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can create the most powerful transformations. Retry.